I saw the manic behavior.
Yeah.
And I personally got real down that night, Jason. I said, oh, here we go. We're going on to rehab number 7.
Everyone has a story. Real voices, real perspectives, real understanding. Let's see the world through their eyes. A podcast from Family and Children's Association. Okay, welcome to Through Their Eyes, a podcast from Family and Children's Association and Thrive. This is episode 2, Where Does the Time Go? And today our guest is Larry Lamendola. He is the co-chair of the Levittown Community Action Coalition and the first vice president of the Wantagh Lions Club. And maybe, I don't want this to go to his head, my favorite person that I've met since I've been doing this. Not just the podcast, because that's only a couple weeks. I'm talking like been in this profession. You've been like a grandpa to me, Larry. I'm just kidding.
The hair or something.
No.
Great
Larry,
hair.
how are you,
Pleasure
man?
to be here. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jason.
It's really good to have you. There's so much stuff that I want to talk to you about today. First, let's just start. Honestly, I'm just going to throw it out there because I don't want to start telling your story, but tell everybody, who's Larry Lamendola? Give us the rundown.
Who's Larry Lamendola? Larry Lamendola is thoughtful, generous. That's what I like to be thought of about, and giving of my time, especially in retirement. I was always reticent to do stuff like this when I was working. When you're working, you just caught up in things. And I remember doing stuff with the United Way when I was working. The insurance company that I worked for, they needed people to give. And I remember doing a video about the United Way. Yep.
Now, you do a ton of advocacy in the community. And, for me, just personally, I'm a person in long-term recovery. That's how we met. We met on the Levittown Community Action Coalition.
Yep.
And one of the things that I did not know before I started as a peer advocate with Thrive and Family and Children's Association is just how many boots there are on the ground in Nassau County and Suffolk County.
Mm-hmm.
My bubble was just people in recovery.
Right.
And I really did not know a lot of the stories of families that have been affected by substance use disorder. And you were one of the first people that I heard speak. And you have a story that's very moving that really touched me when I heard it. Can you tell everybody a little bit about your story?
The story is Lisa. It's interesting. I'm sitting in the dining room, and to my left is the den, and ahead of me is the kitchen. And a lot of these stories just kind of transpired. And there's our memory is here. And just like, and I told you this story at one point, I know on our long train ride, where Lisa had she came back from her initial day, her initial rehab, and she sat us down in the kitchen. We were at the kitchen table, which is ahead of me, and said, you got to sit down. Here's the daughters having the parents sit down. Usually the parents have the kids sit down. I said, she said, this is for the rest of my life. Fast forward maybe a couple of weeks later, when she was kind of not feeling the recovery and trying to possibly get back into it. And to my left, in this den right here, she looked at us with tears and said, for a parent to hear this, it's just mind blowing. She said, I don't want to be a heroin addict. And the tears rained down. I looked at Eileen, and Eileen looked at me, and it was like, where do you go from there?
Yeah.
Where do you go from there? I mean, because this is where she kind of fell off, and okay, we're going to be on to rehab number 2. So it was such a difficult road. There's a lot of triggers that, send me back and think about her. And I sent you the story.
Yep.
Just recently, and it was just like in a parking lot after we were at the coalition meeting, and And this is not hyperbole. It's just these all the windows were down in my car. I
Yeah,
didn't do
that
a
was
thing,
crazy.
and the sunroof was open. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then I got home, and Eileen told me about hearing about her, Lisa's friend in recovery, Roxy, and Roxy telling us about this, another friend in recovery, Jane, who was much older. They were both older than Lisa. And Jane had passed away, and Jane had come to our house. Jane rode back from Florida when Lisa was in recovery, almost like a second mom. It was just wonderful relationship. After Lisa passed, we had breakfast with her one day. Jane was doing well, but I don't really know what really transpired with Jane, whether she had gone back into using. I just knew she died of pneumonia. So yeah,
Right.
it's pretty sad. But these are the stories that come back to you and remind you of what Lisa went through.
Yeah. I want to, oh God, I have so many things I want to talk to you about. You know what? Instead of going off track, I was going to ask you about what it's like to live with someone with substance use disorder as a family member, because I think oftentimes we hear the stories of the people that are in recovery, but one of the things that we don't hear is about the families and how it affects the families. And there's so much stigma out in the community
Yeah,
that I can't imagine what it would be like to have a daughter who has substance use disorder. And the stigma out there, people look at people that have substance use disorder, heroin addicts, whatever you want to call it, in a
yeah.
different way. So how did you deal with that as a parent, knowing that Lisa had this thing that she was dealing with and struggling with, and you guys are along for that ride? And, how is it living with someone that has that struggle?
Well, they always say this, Jason, and you know this for sure. It's one day at a time, one
Yep.
moment at a time, 1 minute. There was always those snippets of time that we recall, and then it's weird. Eileen and I remind each other. You remember the time when this happened with Lisa and that happened with Lisa? It's just very difficult, and how how educating everybody else around you, other family members and friends, and saying, no, no, this is, we have to do it this way. It's almost like, I often use this analogy. If you remember the commercials, the Staples easy button.
Mm-hmm.
There's no easy button here. You know that for sure. This
Yeah.
is not. This is not an easy road. So it was. It was difficult. It was a lot of emotions, a lot of, a lot of, I think at the beginning there was a lot of anger, because when you don't know, you get angry, why are you doing this? And it becomes, you place it on yourself. Why are you doing this to us?
Yeah.
And then you don't put yourself in the person's shoes. And I think that's important to do that, to understand every day, because there's always something around the corner that's gonna transpire. I've always mentioned the story. One night I'm getting ready to go to bed, and all of a sudden, Lisa's in the bathroom, and she goes, "Oh no!" I was like, "What happened?" I mean, runs to the bathroom, and there's Lisa. Her arm blew up, and injected herself into a. She didn't inject herself into a vein. I'm like, "Oh boy." What are we gonna do? I said, Lisa, we got to get you to an emergency room. The whole arm blew up, her hand blew up. Yep. So we went down to the emergency room, and it's interesting when she's on the gurney, and it was an overnight physician,
Right.
and it just her legs started shaking, and I'm like, oh no, she's kind of like going through some sort of withdrawal here, and she needs the fix. She needs heroin. She needs it, and which she was going to do it, which was unbeknownst to us. And so I remember that was right before her last her final rehab. So that one sticks out in my mind. And it's interesting how things that are in place now that weren't in place in 2019 could have helped. And we often talk about the Sherpas.
Yeah, you did tell me that one time.
could have helped. What's come out now, CN Guidance, where they have a 24/7 facility,
Yeah,
where
excellent.
the hospital that we were in could have referred us instead of the physician there shrugging.
Right.
I'm like, shrugging. I'm like, in this day and age, you would be monsterly appalled
Yeah.
at such a reaction.
Yeah.
But things are quite different.
So you lost Lisa to fentanyl poisoning in
Yep.
2019.
Yep.
I want to talk to you about grief a little bit. All right. Because what amazes me, and I've met so many loved ones that have lost family members similar to Lisa. And it always amazes me how, I mean, this may sound cliche, but turning that pain into power or turning that pain into passion. And I saw an article one time, I might have showed you or you showed me, but it was an illustration and it was talking about grief. And just the bottom line was the message was grief never goes away, right? Because people could say, oh, it'll get better with time, it'll get easier, but grief never goes away. It always stays the same. But what happens is your life can grow around that grief. The grief doesn't go away. And I feel like from where I sit, the advocacy that you do is you and your wife had a choice. You could have gone one way or you could have gone the other. And you've chosen to use this experience and turn that pain into some sort of power and passion. And so how does that look for you now? Like you said, you're retired. You are not retired. Like,
No, no, no. Between what I do with the coalition and, people calling me on the telephone and, say, Larry, I had this, I invited a guest to the most recent coalition meeting. And he's interested, and he went through an experience with, his girlfriend, his son's girlfriend. And, as it turned out, yeah, I was happy at the end of the story. She lived. Oh, I'm happy about that.
yeah,
But, turning this all into advocacy, it actually started even before even before we buried Lisa. I said I got to do something. And I talk about Eileen taught in the Levittown school district, and she had a good friend, Marge, who taught in the school district too. And we were all having a great discussion at the house here after one day at the wake, and she said, "All right, I got this." And she said, "Yeah, let me talk to Tony McDonald, who was the then superintendent of schools in the Levittown School District. She knew her better than Eileen knew her." And Tony McDonald got in touch with me. I got in touch with a man by the name of Jordan Margulis. And Jordan, at that time, was a social worker within the school's guidance council, I believe, or a social worker. And I spent a good, better part of an hour, pouring my heart out and telling Lisa's entire story. He says, "I got something for you," and that's how he introduced me to the coalition. I didn't know quite how it was going to transpire. Well, the typical. We, you go from school to school, and here's my story, and maybe I can help. It's kind of evolved. Each situation has evolved. As I said, people call me, out of nowhere. It's I even remember Lisa towards the end of her life was working in Glen Cove at it was a stonemason uh, where they did work, and they even did work on Billy Joel's house too. At least they revealed it to me at the time. And the woman that her boss, who the husband owned the company, but the wife had worked there during the day, and she had a friend. And this was after Lisa passed. Oh, listen, I'm doing something for the Lions Club on Sunrise Highway. They were erecting the Lions Club sign and this big heavy equipment in the background. And I said, "Yeah, hold on a second. Can you call me later?" And things like that
yeah,
happen. And I helped her, and I at that time I gave Steve Chasman when he was at LICAD,
yep,
gave him class. I said, "Steve, you got to help help me. He said, no problem. Have them call me. This is my cell. Boom. But these are the kinds of things because these are immediate concerns. People need help.
Yeah.
Those are just a few examples.
Yeah. And it's, to me, I know you want to help people, but, it also seems like there's a lot of, this is Lisa's legacy.
Yeah,
I mean, it seems like, and maybe that's where the grief comes in. It's like, turning that pain into power, but it's also keeping that legacy alive,
yeah. It's interesting. The Lyra, the president, his name is Hatami. Is that I'm pretty sure. I was there for overdose awareness day. It wasn't this year; it was probably 2 years ago. And he came up. Yeah, he came up to me. I was talking to him, and I was explaining to Lisa. I said, Lisa, she knew, she had a problem, but she really wanted to help people, and that's where her friend Jane and Roxy come in, and she always, Dad, I'm going to another meeting, and at one point after she had gotten the Vivitrol shot, and I'm sure we can talk about Vivitrol later, what it is for those who don't know what it is. And she was good, and I said, "All right, go ahead and go." But it was he explained to me that she's a two. She was The fact of the matter is, Lisa was a two-stepper.
Mm.
Went from step one
Yep.
all the way to step 12, and as folks know, step one is recognizing. Step 12 is you've reached it. You help people out.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Lisa didn't think about Lisa along the way. Didn't pay enough attention. I'm not a diagnostician here, Jason. I can only tell you. I'm not a clinician. I can only tell you what I observed.
Yeah. I mean, there's a great expression that I heard when I first got sober, and we're not bad people getting good, we're sick people getting well. And I think that what a lot of people might not understand is, you hear like, why can't you just have one drink? Why can't you just not do the drugs and maybe just drink a beer? Why? And the truth of the matter is, for me, I didn't know why.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to tell me the solution, but nobody was able to explain the problem. And I think that that's actually a good transition, is to talk about the coalitions and what the coalitions do within the community and what people in the community can do to help, because there's the education component, there's the prevention component, and there's the treatment component. What can people even do, and what are the coalitions doing to help move that forward?
Well, the education component is great because for instance, as you know, the Levittown Community Action Coalition, we've got the coalition. We all meet at the steering committee, and we have everybody from, when I started, there was a parish priest, Father Ralph. Now
Mm-hmm.
we have Father John came in, and
Yeah, it
even
was
at
nice that
that
he came.
time we had Helen Dalton from the Dalton Funeral Home, and I explained to people, it's like, why? Because the priests get to say the mass when people die, and the funeral homes get to bury the folks, and they didn't have to be diagnosticians there to diagnose the problem, what was going on. Police officers are there from the pop unit in Nassau County. They're great, because they see it right there. And I've had discussions with the pop officers, especially during the prescription take back event that they attend. So I have an audience with them as we
Mm-hmm.
take back the prescription, the opioids that a lot of times it's older people that are bringing them to Wisdom Lane School so that they can be eventually incinerated. So there's so many folks, social workers and teachers, superintendents, and yourself, a person in long-term recovery. That when you came to that coalition, it was like, aha, we have another piece,
Mm.
because you need all these pieces to have a nice cohesive unit. And as they say, it takes a village.
Yeah.
And I encourage it wherever I go. I happen to be, oh boy, I was in Great Neck Nassau County did an event in Great Neck at a synagogue in Great Neck, and um, I, I was the last person. I waited until everybody spoke, until the last. I said, "You don't want to be me." But then I morphed into talking about the coalition. This is what you have to do. And they had a great big cohesive group there. It was much big. And I know, if you get 300 people in a room, you say, ooh, got a captive crowd here.
Yeah.
Let's talk to them and tell them this is what you got to do. You all got to get together. You got to get the village together. Got to get the politicians together, get the police officers in that local community, and just with what I was talking about, the Levittown Coalition, so important, and social workers. I see, just the grants that have been received for Levittown and Island Trees, getting social workers into the schools to not only diagnose what's going on with substance, any substance. It doesn't have to be heroin, fentanyl, but alcohol, vapes. It's also so important, and plus occurring disorders. Now more than ever, it seems like we need these folks.
Yeah.
You know.
You talked about Vivitrol. If you want to go back and talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that and tell everybody what that is, because
Yeah.
there is this whole medicated-assisted treatment that is controversial out there.
Yep. For the longest time, we had heard about Vivitrol throughout Lisa's treatment, and the problem was Lisa, she'd get better, and then she'd relapse, and then we'd go, in between. And as the thing about Vivitrol, what it is a blocker to the brain, essentially, for layman's terms and for my terms, and this is how I learned it. It blocks the brain from having the craving for the drug, and it only lasts 30 days. And if you don't get the next shot, you potentially in trouble. So Lisa, towards the end of her life, in early July of 2019, at the last facility, so she was clean enough from like May of 2019 until July of 2019, and the folks there convinced her, and she was all on board for it. Got the Vivitrol injection, and it was like, ooh, okay, got the baby back.
Yep.
We're going, and it was Jason, I told you this story before. It was euphoria for the entire family. We were just beside ourselves. It was just wonderful. But there's that upside and the downside. This is only going to work for 30 days and maybe a little bit more. And if you don't go get the next shot, and she didn't, and that's when things started to, in August. You just know. After a while, once you're a parent and you see your loved one, you just see it in their eyes, their whole being, their whole persona. There's a certain glow to a human being.
Yep.
When they're quote unquote normal and not using substance. Yeah, the glow goes away, and then the reactions. I even remember, like, the last night when Lisa was alive. She was. I saw the manic behavior.
Yeah.
And I personally got real down that night, Jason. I said, "Oh, here we go. We're going on to rehab number 7."
Yeah.
And the next day, she was due to go to Seafield for her outpatient. She didn't make it there, Jason, as I told you. Yeah.
That feeling, the feeling of being powerless, right? Because I have 2 daughters, and I haven't had the experiences you've had, obviously, but there are times, just as a parent in general, when you feel so powerless, and there's only so much you can do or say to talk to your kid without them just running away from you. There's so many times I want to say this and this and this and this, but how am I gonna tell them not to do something? I would be a hypocrite. I always say, I'm not going to tell you, what to do. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You need to know that you can talk to me, and if you don't want to talk to me, here's a therapist. You can talk, I just
Hmm.
need to know that you're talking to someone. But there is that feeling of that powerlessness of not being able to control what's going on. And
I, if I could just piggyback on that, the best conversations that I had with Lisa and Eileen had with Lisa, it was mostly me because at that time I was newly retired and Lisa had the job in Glen Cove. And at that, one juncture, we didn't let her have the car. We were a little wary about it. And I would drive her to work in the morning. And those were some great times because think of it, Jason, when you're in the car with the kids, they're a captive crowd. And I recommend this to anybody.
I've been on a train with you, so I get it.
Yeah.
I felt pretty captive
Long,
for 5 6 hours.
you had long-winded Larry for 5 hours. You
No,
heard
it was very
about the whole
enjoyable.
story of my life.
Very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah, those car conversations for sure. Anytime you get that opportunity to be in front of your kid and have those real conversations. I mean, when I was a kid, we just didn't talk like that to our parents at all. I think that kids, even though they'll be kids, are more open today to having the conversations about mental health and about substance use disorder. And I know we give kids a bad rap because they're always on their phone, and they're watching TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff. But the fact of the matter is, there's so many sober influencers that are on social media that have this platform, and they actually do good things with it, that it's making it a little bit more common. So, sometimes I'm like, oh, my kid's not talking to me, but I just need to know she's talking to somebody. I wanted to ask you also, so in the work that I'm doing, right, the peer advocacy work, it's hard, right? There's hard work, okay? And some days are harder than others because, my recovery is so connected to the work that I'm doing. My personal recovery is so connected. And if I'm not careful, I'm picking scabs all day long. If I'm not careful, I'm in trouble. So when that work gets hard for you, what does Larry do to take care of himself? And have you gotten to a point ever where you're like, I just can't do this today? I need time for myself. I can't tell the story one more time. Does that
Mm.
ever get that way for you?
I think that it's interesting when along the way when people asking me to do things, asking me to do things, asking me to do things. And to tell you the truth, I get more sometimes from the Lions Club. I remember when Lisa first passed, it was the Lions Club. Other clubs would ask me not to talk about Lisa's story, but to help out in the Lions Club because they know, oh, here's the guy. He's a doer.
Yeah.
We got him. Yeah, let's get him over to our side. So I just there alone, I said, all right, I want to be busy. I want to be helping, but 24/7 helping, where I do take that deep breath, and I need to be with the bride. Need to go away, and as I
Mm-hmm.
said, we just came back from Aruba, so you need that sunshine and that moment, with your loved one to to get away. Getaway time is really it's spiritual, it's healing for yourself and your soul, so that when you get back home, and I can't wait to get back. Like you see me at the coalition meeting. I do my homework. I try
Yeah.
to. I try to bring something to the table, and that I've been working on, or some people is asking me stuff about. It's like, and when people ask I'm like, they're asking my opinion. That's pretty cool. Who am I? But
Yeah.
I guess the experiences of having gone through it and now doing all the advocacy, that's why they asked me.
Yeah. And we talked about something right before we went live, and we were talking about it with Kim before the show about, usually you see the moms
Yeah.
are more active in this. And, I don't, the organization Truth Farm, right? Truth Farm. And they had that Trail of Truth event in DC.
Yes.
I forget, it was the fall or the summer, whatever it was. And I went, and they had those like 3,000 tombstones with pictures of loved ones that were lost to, either overdose or just drug related instance, substance use disorder, whatever it is. And it's overwhelming. And I was there, and I think maybe I met 5 or 6 men,
Yeah.
maybe. So how did it happen? And I don't know what is, behind the scenes with your wife. I know she's very active too and very
Yeah.
supportive, but
Yeah. She does. Yeah.
how do you find yourself being this man in this sea of what usually is women that are advocating for the children and the loved ones that they've lost?
It's uh, it's unique. When I went down to I was asked by the S Community Counseling Center. They said, "Hey, Kadka or Samsa needed a man because they had a woman, a mom, they needed a dad to come down and talk." And I went down to just outside of Washington D.C. It was only, I'd say, about 200 people, and they were all across the country, and they needed me to tell my story. And when I told the story, and that what, and I did touch upon that, and I said, "Why you're a dad? First of all, I'm a girl dad. Second of all, I always put a lot of faith and trust in the fact that my mom really brought me up.
Yep.
Loved mom. Mom was strong, strong woman, assertive but gentle, and she went through the school of hard knocks during the Depression.
Yep.
So that I carry that with me every day. That she always told the story, and when you're a kid, you think it's hilarious that me and my brothers we were given a few graham crackers, and I shared with my brothers. We were in, they called them orphanages back then. Now they're foster homes.
Right.
So like, oh my, when I had first learned about this when I was a kid, I used to say, wow, that's pretty, that's pretty intense. So I think I carry that with me, that caring, feminine side, maybe.
You do wear a perfume that I can't quite put my finger on it, but when I'm around, I always come home. My wife's like, "Who are you hanging out with?" I'm like, "It's just Larry and his musk." So listen, I know we don't have too much time, but
Go
I
ahead.
do want to ask you a couple more things.
Yep.
For the parents, the families out there that are navigating this situations similar to how you navigated Lisa's, and between the healthcare system and treatment and just showing up and the highs and the lows, if you can tell people out there that are trying their hardest to navigate that situation, what wisdom would you impart to them on how to navigate and how to deal and how to prepare and all that stuff?
I would first say be patient, get as much good help as possible. Now there's more help out there than there was when Eileen and I first heard about Lisa. As a matter of fact, Lisa did a lot of the research, a lot of the work. We trusted. I remember the the first person that we trusted was a woman by the name of Elsie Demers,
Mm,
and Elsie now lives upstate New York. And every
hmm.
time I see Elsie at an event in Albany, I get a real big hug. It's like Eileen and I, and I'm going to tear up a bit here.
Yeah.
We always called her our angel.
Mm,
So you got to place your trust in what is before you, and place your trust in clinicians and the folks that are doing the work to help your loved one out. And then there's the we talked about the talks beforehand. Never be afraid to talk to your children.
right.
I as I said before, there's no magic in this, Jason. You just do the best you can.
Yep. If Lisa is watching right now, right? What do you think Lisa's thinking about what you're doing right now? What would Lisa say about where you are right now?
I think there are two Lisas here. The first Lisa would be the Lisa that be she never liked to have the focus on her. But I, I think overall she'd be proud. She'd be thinking about that 12th step, and dad's carrying the water.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful, man. Listen, I thank you for spending this time with us. Like I said, I've had so many conversations with you, and a lot of times people are around. So I was really looking forward to having this one-on-one time and talking about some of the stuff that we haven't gotten to talk about. I don't want to wait until the next time we're on a train for 5 hours. And next time I'm going to bring a good set of headphones just in case.
Tune me out a little?
No. So anything else you want to say before we go, Larry?
No. Well, I do want to say that, yeah, I'm steadfast about the opioid settlement money, and that's my focus now. Let's get it out there to help those folks, especially in light of what's happening with Medicaid, especially those who need recovery.
Yep.
Get that money to these people, please.
Yep. All right, buddy. Thanks, Larry. And
right.
This has been another episode of Through Their Eyes. If you guys like this episode, please share it on social media. We'd appreciate it. And until next time, take care. Thanks for listening to Through Their Eyes. To learn more about Family and Children's Association and Thrive, visit fcali.org and thriveli.org.